They have a great navy, but they gutted the rest of their military to get those super carriers out there, and they no longer have the fleets necessary to protect the super carriers. So those super carriers can only sail with an American escort ring. They functionally are not an independent country now.
Big mistake.
They cut off their foot to leave the EU and don't have a backup plan. 6 years on, they still don't have a backup plan. Scandinavia, positive demographics. Trade system is not dependent on the Russians or even the Germans. And they, from a defense point of view, are practically best buds with the United States already. So you bring Finland and Sweden into NATO, which is imminent. And I can see them basically entering an extended NAFTA system as well and doing very well for themselves. Armenia now has to deal with a world where the Turks are the preeminent power in their neighborhood. They are not prepared for that politically. Turkey will probably do fine. Solid manufacturing base. Everything that gives the Germans problems is going to be an opportunity for Turkey. And they are by far the most powerful country in their neighborhood. And if there's any version of Russia that survives, it will be dependent on the Turks to access the wider world. So I see a very bright future for the Turks.
Huge.
Based on who's deciding who's in what bucket, probably 10 to 15%.
Think about that. That's crazy.
I'm pretty confident on all the big trends. The biggest challenge for any forecaster, and no exception for me, is timing. I mean, I can tell you that the financial system that undergirds all things China is unstable. It's basically Enron on a good day, and it's going to collapse. But it's been like that for 15 years, and they're still here. So things happen faster or slower. COVID sped along things far more than Trump did, and Trump sped things along more than any president yet. Deciding when this stuff is going to go down, and that's a nice way of saying which order it's going to go down, has always been the biggest challenge. Oh, definitely more towards socialists because of the baby boomers. They have voted themselves the world's richest benefits policy. And they're now retired. On average, they retire actually this quarter. And they have the votes to make sure that those transfers continue hell or high water. And the millennials, who are the second largest voting bloc, will support them all the way up, because the alternative is the boomers moving in with the millennials. And from the millennials' point of view, that's a strictly one-way relationship. We're going to borrow to pay for the boomers, and then the millennials will probably close down those programs so they don't have to pay for them until Gen X is dead. And then when it's millennials' turn to get the benefits, they will vote them back, and we do this again.
You're not optimistic.
Oh my God, no. I mean, Greece became a ward of the European Union back in 2007. It's actually in a worse debt position now than it was then. And now the Europeans are about to lose their single largest form of funds in the shape of Germany. So yeah, Greece is a ward or it's a failed state. There's really no other option at this point. There's less industry now there than there was 20 years. But I like companies that have most of their operations in the United States, who are in industries that are energy intensive. Courtesy of the shale sector, we have the world's cheapest electricity and oil. I like products that are where their demand is demographically driven. And if the end product is exportable, that's kind of my trifecta. So anything that is in energy processing, petrochemicals, food processing, those are kind of at the top of my list.
Because there's going to be an endless need for that.
Yeah, there's a need, there's an ability to get it to where it needs to go. And the United States is already the world's most competitive economy in those sectors before the competition even gets hit. So if the competition gets hit, holy crap. The single largest purchaser of American energy products at the moment is India. Mexico.
Oh, it's Mexico.
But the more problems we have in the Russian space, the Europeans are moving up that list very, very rapidly. And in terms of food production, Mexico is again number one, but we are looking at catastrophic collapse in China's ability to grow its own food or import. So those southern cities from Shanghai to Hong Kong, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a population bigger than Mexico.
Hey, by the way, India is going to be fine. Yeah.
India is broadly going to be fine. Yes. A lot of this stuff passes them by. They're the first stop out of the Persian Gulf for energy. They have an advanced petrochemical system, so they can process a lot of their own fertilizer. They're going to have to make decisions like the United States. If we want stuff, we have to build it ourselves. They're going to have to do the same thing.
So in a normal energy project, when the price drops too much, they shut in production.
Right.
And then they restart it later. And no one likes to do that. It costs something, it costs time, and you're not getting income in the meantime, but it can be done. But you can't do that in the Russian permafrost. If the crude stops moving through the permafrost layer for any reason, it freezes into gel, and the water that comes up as a byproduct freezes into ice. And when water turns into ice, it expands and it pops the pipe from the inside. What's going on right now is the insurance ban on Russian vessels on January 1 will expand to any vessel carrying any Russian cargo. And at the same time, the Europeans are about to enact their ban, saying that no Russian crude whatsoever can be sold by any boat to any European market. And that is going to force a degree of shut-in the ports. The pressure will build back up to the wells, and then the wells will freeze solid. That's going to happen pretty quick. And since the demand for energy tends to be inelastic, you get an outsized price response. So assuming for the moment that all else is equal, and I realize that is never true, you remove 4 million barrels a day of Siberian output, and you're going to get $180 oil. Now, since then, the Chinese look like they're going out of their way to experience an economic crisis. And if we see a drastic decrease in their ability to absorb crude, that's going to change the price forecast. There's so much in motion right now, but none of it is great. I like companies that center their production and their sales in North America because we've got the highest value-added labor system between Mexico and the United States, and we produce where we sell for the most part. Also, if the product is demographically driven in terms of its demand profile, I like that. And if the end product is very energy intensive for its production, because we have the cheapest electricity and energy in the world, that's great. And if the end product is exportable, that's kind of like my trifecta. And so agricultural processing, petrochemicals, things like that are most of my portfolio. Since the Ukraine war started, I have gotten into commodities in a very big way, but I will caution you that most players in most commodity markets are truly global. And you want to make sure you are not exposed to Ukraine or Russia or Brazil, because the Russian system is fallen apart. The Ukrainian system is unlikely to come back, and Brazil is dependent upon material inputs that come from Russia. So you've got to be very, very careful where you're putting your money in that space, or you're going to get exposed to all the bad along with the good. I don't have the data in front of me, but on the whole, roughly 40 to 50% of Brazilian fertilizer inputs are sourced from the former Soviet Union, and most of the remainder is either China or the Middle East. So, there's no version of this picture that looks good for Brazil. Most of the economic growth that the world, not the US, the world has experienced since 1990 is that we've brought in an empire worth of raw materials from the Russian space. And we've brought in 1 billion workers from the Chinese space. And the outputs from both of those systems have allowed Brazil to bloom in a way that it never could before. We're now seeing all of that in reverse. And if you remove a lot of the added fertilizer that's come into the situation, then the 2.5 billion people that we have added since 1990 are in some very real danger, because Brazil is the world's second largest agricultural exporter. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat. Ukraine is number 5. And Chinese capital has been part of what's made this all work. And we've seen an increase of the Chinese lifespan by over 40%, 50% since 1990. These things are all linked together. And when you take away the food supply that has allowed all of this to happen, we get to a very dark place very, very quickly. And you cannot replace fertilizer supplies quickly. Nitrogen and phosphate take a minimum of 3 years. Potash usually takes 10. And so far, we've only lost roughly 1/3 of the former Soviet Union's output of this stuff. And that has already been enough for almost every producer in the world to have gone through all of their reserves. The only reason we're not in a food crisis already is because people had reserves. And Mother Nature was very, very kind to us this past year. There's no way we're going to repeat that next year. We're in this weird situation where the Biden administration is trying to provide letters of comfort to point out to financiers and shippers that these things are not under sanctions in order to limit the damage. But if you're a financial house and you see these sanctions getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and with every new genocide that the Russians propagate, you got to wonder whether you want to be affiliated at all. So most, to this point,